Okay. Hello, everyone. So, thank you all for being here. We're going to get started in a second here as people file in. Okay. Wow, 62 people here. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds here once we get started, but we're very excited to see you all here. Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. Oh, wow, 70 people in attendance. This is great. We're very excited that we're all here today. So my name is Jonathan Delorme, program lead for the summer internship program. We're so excited that you're here. While people are filing in, as we're still getting more people, now we're up to 75 over here. Could you please put in your name and where you're interning at for the summer into the chat? We'd really appreciate it. We'd love to see where everyone's coming from. So as we settle in, feel free to submit your questions into the Q&A. The panelists can see those and can answer them accordingly. We're very thankful for our sponsors for our whole webinar series. They're Martin's Point Healthcare, Tyler Technology, and CEI. We have a great panel for you today. We're talking about choosing your own adventure, life after your internship, something that's very applicable to all of you. And I know that you have lots of questions for our panel and excited to hear them talk. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ashley, our today's moderator. Ashley is the marketing manager at Lebreux, Maine, a nonprofit focused on all things attracting young, talented people like yourself to live and work in Maine. Without further ado, I'll have Ashley introduce the rest.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm really excited about today's conversation. This is something I'm really passionate about personally, as someone who did not know what life after internship and post-grad looked like. I so much so didn't know what it looked like that I actually started a podcast fully designated to post-grad life. So I'm really excited to introduce our panelists today. So the goal of today's conversation is my hope here is by speaking with our panelists and hearing from some of their experiences, you guys can start to ask yourself some of these similar questions and hopefully get some insight on what life might look like for yourself. So I'm going to kick this off by having everyone introduce themselves, tell us where you work, what your role is, and a little bit about your role and your company. And I will kick this off first with Marissa. You want to start us off?
Hi, yeah, I'd love to. Just as a kind of forefront, I am in the office. So if you hear anything or see people walk through, sorry about that, but I guess it's a great way to see what's going to go on after post-grad. So again, my name's Marissa. I work at Martin's Point Healthcare. I work at the Portland location, but I do work for all 6 of our sites, which are located throughout Maine and New Hampshire. I am now a senior clinical integration analyst. I work a lot with coding and quality measures with healthcare contracts.
Perfect. Now maybe Kristen, you want to kick us off?
Hi, my name is Kristen Lebreux, and I work at Baker Newman Noyes. We refer to it as BNN for short, so I might use that acronym. But if you're not familiar with BNN, we are a regional accounting firm. We employ about 330 employees, and we have 5 locations. I work out of the Portland office, but we also have a Portsmouth and Manchester location, as well as a Boston and Woburn office. And we mainly offer tax and assurance services, but we also have some advisory avenues such as healthcare, transaction, and business and technology. So there's a lot of variety that BNN offers. I currently work as a tax senior, and the pod that I'm in is considered multi-generational businesses. So I work on a lot of pass-through entities, which would entail partnership returns, S-corp returns, as well as high net worth individual returns.
Great. And Owen?
Great. Thanks, Ashley. And good to see everyone. Happy Tuesday. My name's Owen McCarthy. I'm the co-founder, president of MedRhythms. And at MedRhythms, we build medical devices to help people improve their walking, following a range of neuroinjury diseases. We actually use music and how rhythm and music can improve walking. And we have built software that has sensors that measure the walking, feed it into a handheld device, and change the music in real time. We just announced that our first products through the FDA, maybe 10 days ago. So we're excited about bringing that to market soon. We're based in Portland. We have 45 people. My background is as a biological engineer. Went to University of Maine, originally grew up in Patton, Maine, so the woods. And then went on to get my MBA. And when we started MedRhythms, moved back to Maine. Addition to MedRhythms, and I imagine a number of you out there here, I do serve on the Board of Trustees for the University of Maine system. So for any University of Maine system school interns, welcome. And I'll welcome any of you no matter where you went, but glad to be here.
Exciting. So I'm really excited by what you all are currently doing, because for me, I feel like a lot of people didn't get to know these different careers. And I don't know about you guys, but I personally, when I was younger, probably couldn't have predicted that I would be doing any of your jobs. I don't know if when you were younger, you were like, I am going to co-found MedRhythms and that's what I'm going to do. So I wanted to touch on if any of you, what did you think you were going to do, and how did you kind of get into where you are now? Did you jump right into grad school after, maybe get an internship? Yeah, so maybe we'll start off with Marissa. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot like you, Ashley, I kind of was like, oh, school's over. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I was actually going to pursue my master's in occupational therapy originally. And it worked out where I didn't get into the program that made the most sense for me. So naturally my world was shattered, and I was devastated, which is not to put a damper on the mood or anything. It's just to say, it's okay. Everything will work out and you'll find your little niche in your community and the work that you want to do. I actually was, this opportunity that I'm working at now kind of like landed in my lap. I started as an intern with this same group of folks. And then we started to look for a permanent hire, which I applied for and got the position. And then we even furthered and built the department further. And now I'm the manager of said department. So connections are so important, which I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing, but.
Well, that's the advice I always give myself is, if you don't know what you want to do, a couple things is I say, like, take an internship or a job where you're able to jump into so many different fields. So like for me, I knew I wanted to do marketing, but I didn't know what area specifically of marketing. So I worked for a small business where I could have my hand in every area of marketing. Like I would be, as opposed to just digital marketing, and then networking. So I wanted to meet as many people as possible. So another thing that you guys, while you're talking networking, you're able to open your eyes and have these conversations with folks and hear about those jobs you wouldn't otherwise hear about. But Kristen, any thoughts on what did you come out of the womb saying, I'm going to go into accounting? Possibly.
No, I originally actually wanted to become a lawyer. I'm not that, well, I am actually quite far off, but I majored in accounting and I minored in law. And law school still might be in the cards for me, but as of right now, I'm taking a break from school. I was lucky enough, though, my high school had a center of technology or a vocational center where they had a business academy, and I was actually able to take accounting, like an introductory accounting course. And so I knew that I enjoyed accounting, and then therefore, when I was looking for which schools to apply to, I was really interested in business school because I knew that I had that exposure already in high school, and that I really enjoyed the coursework. And so I did my undergrad at Bentley University, And I immediately followed that with 1 year of grad school. And during that time, I had done 2 tax summer internships at Baker Newman Noyes, and was hired right after grad school.
Very cool. I feel like that's, I don't know, it's nice too when you go into something to have your eyes open as to not just being like, this is a temporary job, or maybe I'll go somewhere else, because then you're not really getting to view it as what it is. And I think, Marissa, you did the same thing. Like, this was, or something similar. You started at Martin's Point, applied to a temp position. So it is important to keep your eyes open and be really open-minded. But Owen, what was your experience? Again, a similar sort of.
Yeah, I had no idea. I mean, along the way, right? So like, I think I remember in high school saying I wanted to be like an eye doctor or something, which didn't come to fruition. And then I remember going to Maine and saying, I'm going to go to engineering. I don't even really know what this is, but I like math and science. And so went there. And then when I was there, I think my vision was I wanted to like work my way up through a Fortune 500 company. And that's where I got my internship, et cetera. And then left and worked for 3 or 4 years. And then when I applied to business school, I'm like, I want to be a executive at said company. And then while I was at business school, my best friend from undergrad, Brian Harris, was a clinician at Spalding Rehab. And I was advising him on like how to take his work using music to help people walk better at Spalding and reach more people, because there wasn't many people like him in the world. And eventually we just decided to start MedRhythms together. And now we're like sort of building this and committed along the way. And I think some themes though, Ashley, which you touched on and others, were good advice I got along the way was like, wherever you land, go somewhere where you can learn as much as possible, as fast as possible, and try as many things, because like, it's really easy to figure out what you don't want to do. I figured out I didn't want to be an engineer and I didn't want to work in plants. So like, there was a lot of things I dropped off the list when I went through that process. And number 2 is each of those like journeys, I can think of a mentor or 2 that I would go to like every like 3 to 6 months or more regularly, and sort of check in, like get their feedback, see where I'm going. And that was always like super helpful to keep me honest on that path until I sort of pivoted to other paths. And I'm certain I'll have other pivots somewhere along my life and career again, which is fun.
Well, I guess that kind of brings me to maybe my next question is, how did you kind of check in with yourselves and know like, hey, I think I'm on the right track, or maybe I need to shift a little bit? Were there any sort of, questions you could ask yourself to check in? Because I think sometimes we can feel maybe a little bit stuck and not know how to do that shift. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I remember junior year at UMaine when I was like studying, I think unit ops or something, being like, I don't really want to do this for my life. But I was like, what else do I do? I'm like 3 years in and I want to finish up, and how do I figure this out? And I remember talking to my mentor at the time, and he's like, well, Owen, there's a lot of like really like interesting people that have engineering backgrounds that go into business or marketing or sales. And it's actually a really good perspective to bring there. And I think one of the things that like I remember feeling that. I remember checking in to get a broader perspective. And then I realized that like up until that point in your life, you're always put into a box, right? Like you're in a different like grade, you're in a class in a different like school, and then you go here, you're in a major, and there's like, but like once you leave, the possibilities are almost limitless, right? Like, and like you don't need to box yourself in anymore.
It almost becomes like just so, I always refer to it as like paralyzed by opportunity. And although like I don't know which opportunity it is, I had a hard time like pigeonholing myself into something. That's how I felt, at least. But I actually read this book, which I would love to recommend to all of you. It was called The Defining Decade. And that helped me a lot. What the author speaks about is, as opposed to like being frozen and not knowing which direction to go in, maybe just work towards something and pick something, start chipping away at it. And then you can kind of evaluate, rather than like just sitting there and being like, oh, which path do I go? And you might surprise yourself. And if you don't end up liking it, you've learned, like Owen and we've all mentioned a few times, like you've learned what you do and maybe don't like. Marissa, I see you nodding. Yeah.
That is the exact experience I had. Cause like I said, I had planned to go full clinical route. Like I wanted to be a hands-on practitioner. And I still, same as Owen, like kind of like 3 years in, I was like, oh no, like, I don't know if this is what I'm looking for. I don't know if this is the path that's right for me. Which I would just echo what everybody said. It's okay. Don't panic. Because at that time, it felt like my world was crumbling down. And now I'm a data analyst in healthcare, which is something I am not even a numbers person. I just kept meeting the right people and finding the right teammates. So I think it is really important just to note that, like, you're probably gonna do something a little bit differently than what you're planning. And if you don't, that's really cool. But in my experience and all of the professionals I know, that's usually what happens. And I think it's really awesome. Like you said, Ashley, it's really cool to work towards something and then find opportunity along the way.
Yeah. Well, Kristen, as someone who kind of seemed to have an idea that accounting might be the right choice for you, how did you, what were your thoughts continuing on that path? And then, like, how did you know that you wanted to pause schooling for a little bit and stay in this accounting lane before you considered law school?
That's a great question. I really enjoy like learning, and I'm always looking for different ways that I can grow. And I really wanted to experience different levels in tax before I decided whether or not that I wanted to continue to pursue that career or move on to possibly what a law journey might look like. So I've recently been promoted to senior from staff, and ideally I'll be doing a little bit more review work as opposed to prep work, and get a feel for whether I like that type of work, or whether I'm looking for a change.
Yeah, and you're giving yourself kind of that space to figure out what does this next step look like, which is kind of along the lines of us saying, like, working towards something, as opposed to being like, I am going to law school and like, wait, I have something really cool in front of me that I'm actually enjoying, which I think can happen to a lot of us as well. I also wanted to, and you guys, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will do a Q&A at the end, or if they fit in, we will, answer them here. But another concept I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about is sort of how to know, like, accepting a role and if it's like the right role for you. So let me back up a little bit though. So I discussed this concept kind of like a 5-year plan and working backwards from that. So what do you picture your life like in 5 years? Maybe it's how often do you want to go on vacation? And maybe that's the thought of like, you need 2 weeks of vacation time a year, or you need 4 weeks, etc. You want to go to Europe, or you just want to go camping nearby and do a staycation. How do you want to feel when you leave work? Is it creative? Is it accomplished? Is it, I don't know, just you don't want to think about work at all? And you kind of think of these qualities and you work backwards from them to determine what do you want your work situation to look like. I feel like, Owen, as an entrepreneur, that has to be something that has been in your mind when you had thought about what life might look like as an entrepreneur. Example being working for yourself.
Yeah.
About if you did any working backwards, or what it was like when you were your boss.
No, actually, that makes a lot of sense. I love the North Star, right, approach. Like what is like 5 years? What does 10 years look like? And if you're wrong, you still make progress towards something, which is really good. And as I thought about that with my life, I remember when I was at business school, there was this professor that came in and spoke about like, look, like 90% of our graduates are unhappy at their 10-year reunion. And I was like, whoa, wait, like how is this possible? Like you've made a lot of progress. Like you could choose what you do, like all these things. And I remember being like, I don't want to be that person, right? Like that comes back in 10 years. And then I was like, well, what's important? And like, what are the ingredients of like places like where people are unhappy? And it often is like working on a big, meaningful mission, right? And then working in an environment that has a strong culture without a lot of jerks and like all these sort of things. And in my mind, while this Brian thing was going on, I was thinking, I don't know how to do that if I go join a company. If I start a company, then I have control over those things. So I can pick the mission and hire the people and like ideally design a life that in 10 years, like I'm happy and like make a difference. And so that's how I thought about it. I do think the frameworks you were setting up, Ashley, for how to like think about it, if you're not just designing it yourself, are really helpful. But yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, I think it's something that if you're, it can apply to if you don't know what to do or when you're just accepting a role. If you're thinking about like, to be honest with you, I need something a little more flexible, or I'm okay. I just want to get my work done and go home and live my life. Is there anything that had, any thoughts, Marissa or Kristen, on the topic?
I am a very huge advocate for work-life balance. Some people love to work and they live to work, and that's really awesome. I know that for myself, that's not really the lifestyle I have. So I just think you're absolutely right in keeping that in your mind when you're looking at places to work. Like it might be a super great opportunity, but maybe they don't have the time off that you want, and they have all of these other things that are really time consuming or that sort of thing. Or maybe it's a lesser opportunity for what you're looking at, but they are more accommodating to your life needs. So I do think that's really important. And I also think we live in a really cool time where most places that I've experienced really are pushing for that work-life balance. So that's awesome. And another thing is like, I kind of for myself have like would I want to be a manager where I go home and I'm spending an extra 3 hours online because I have A, B, and C to check in on? I don't know. I don't know if that's for me. And I think that's something that you can reevaluate as you pursue your career as well.
Yeah, and just to add on briefly, I think it's really important during your internships to really immerse yourself into the culture and observe the environment, because just to echo what everyone has said, it was really important for me when I accepted my role to ensure the work-life balance. And BNN does offer like a really flexible work environment. And one of the things that really drew me to the firm was the opportunity to really build my career in the way that I want.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think that's a great point, is while you are all in your internships right now, I think what you're, at least for me in my experience with my internships, what I was gaining more than the actual work day-to-day experience was really gaining an understanding of like what the workplace might look like for me. And I was looking at like, I don't know, how do people seem happy here? Do they, what's the culture like? Is my boss nice? And how do I like my boss's working style? And going forward, is this something that like, oh, I really like that my boss was really organized and like, I don't know, maybe had a to-do list for me every morning, or was that a little bit too of a like micromanaging for me and I wanted a little bit more like flexibility in how I work? Those are things you guys can all really look at right now and use that to your advantage. I don't know if when you guys were all in your internships, do you remember taking away anything that you now took into your current work environments? Like I said, maybe it was like a boss's work style, or I mean, it literally could just be like, I need a window near my desk. I've been there.
I think for me, my boss in the time that I was an intern was here's what I need done, go do it how you want to do it, which I loved. And now that I'm kind of managing that department and that kind of style is something I carried with me. Like I was like, my organization, a big thing is we trust each other. Like that's one of our values, where it's like, I'm not going to sit there and manage every single thing that you do. Here's what we need done and when we need it done by. And then of course, I think you'll be able to get it done because I trust you. So I think it is really valuable to have that exploration of like, did I like that? Or did I feel like I had a little too much free time? Because everybody's different, right? Like in college, I preferred online classes because I could prioritize my schedule and do my own thing. Whereas some people hate online classes because they're not structured enough. So it's really important to take that into account when you get a role as well.
Owen, anything to add?
Yeah, my internship was a while ago, so I'm trying to piece it together here. But no, I think a few things. One is, as much as an organization, culture is important. It's like who you work for is almost as important than that, and the team you're on. And so I remember, I worked for a Fortune 500 chemical company doing technical sales. We were out in the field. I remember if I were to go back, which I ended up going back full time, which teams I would want to be on, and the ones I'm like, yeah, it sounds like that team isn't as good. And I avoid those. And so I find people are really important. I also, given that I went back, like knew the processes, like figured out how to operate, and felt really comfortable to hit the ground running when I started. And I think that was helpful for me. I don't know if I had any epiphanies about my working style or anything like that during that time frame.
I mean, I think just the fact that your epiphany, whatever the end result might be, I think it's more just like that you're having the awareness to like analyze it in this way, as opposed to being like, what did I learn technically? Maybe it's like Excel, as opposed to just thinking of that for your internship. I think in retrospect, I thought I left my internship being like, oh, I didn't learn as much about marketing as I thought I would. But really what I gained was like a much bigger perspective. I didn't recognize that until I was older and I was in my first job, that I was like, you know, now that I think back, I actually realized I didn't like this to begin with, and I didn't think about that. We did have a question I wanted to ask, or someone asked, how do you know when it's the right time to move on to another role when you've outgrown your current one or your needs have changed? Does anyone have any initial thoughts on that?
I personally think it's when you stop getting stimulated in your everyday work. When you start doing the same thing every day, you will find that it gets very stagnant, which I think is great, because at some point I can just be like, oh, I don't even have to think about this. But then I'll ask my boss, like, hey, can I do something else that might fit into my role, but will kind of challenge me a little bit? So it's not necessarily jumping roles per se in my experience, but it's just really thinking about like, is this challenging me? Well, I'm a person who likes to learn, so that's what I look for. But if you're a person who's maybe more creative, it's like, do I get that outlet at this role? Can I work with my boss to make that a possibility, et cetera, et cetera. So it's knowing yourself, knowing what you want, and also like communicating that.
I know in my experience, I hope this isn't coming off too harsh, but I had kind of looked at if I wanted to be my boss, and that might be their role. What are they doing for work? And for me, it wasn't, my first job wasn't a company that you could kind of move laterally. It was really only a hierarchy. It was a smaller company. So I kind of looked and I was like, actually, it's a much less like creative role than I would really prefer. So unfortunately for me, I stayed long enough to have those conversations, like Marissa said, where I expanded my role. I tried to grow into something else and create a new role for myself, because I really enjoyed the people I worked with. But at a certain point, I wasn't able to grow anymore past that. So I think that's kind of a good tell, is looking around yourself, and you can even do it in a, like a personal way, as well as like looking at like a lifestyle as well. If they're chained to their desk and that's not something you're looking to do, maybe that's something you can look at as well. Any other thoughts on when it might be time for a new role or move on? Owen or Kristen?
Kind of a hybrid. I mean, I agree with the learning. Like when you hit a ceiling, and particularly early in your career, right? Like you really iterate as fast as possible to figure out what you don't want to do, and then like figure out where you want to focus, and then you can like go from there. But I will note that like the boss thing works, except for maybe in like a small company that's growing fast, right? Like you might not know, like we've gone from like 2 to 10 to 20 to 45 within the last few years, right? Like, so like you, as long as you can see a trajectory of the company or your trajectory within a company, I think I would add on to your statement, I think are the two things to think about. So
great point. My company had been around for a very, very long time and was not in a season of growth. I second that wholeheartedly. I'm currently a very small company. I would also like to be my boss, but we're in a very small company and we will be hiring below us.
Is Nate or Katie your boss?
Technically Nate, but I love Nate.
Right.
Yes. So I think that's a great question, but Kristen, do you have any thoughts on that before we kick off? Something else?
I would say definitely room for growth, advancement, possibly opportunities to try new things as well. I know I recently attempted a new role in the e-filing area, and I didn't love it. But I did have the opportunity to try that, and now I'm actually kind of branching off into a different niche. So I would say, I think when there's, you don't feel like there's any more opportunity for you to develop or even try new things that excite you.
Great question. Or great answer. I also wanted to ask you guys, what are your thoughts on showing your personality at work? I know that was something I really struggled with post-grad. I have new thoughts now, but when I first had graduated, I felt like I was losing a part of myself. I was a little bit nervous, didn't know I was supposed to be like professional. I have a theory, one, that if you do a really good job at your job, you're able to show your personality a little bit more. If you're slacking off, maybe don't be the class clown sort of thought. But Marissa, Kristen, Owen, any thoughts on keeping your personality for your life after you graduate?
I had the same experience, especially during my internship. Like, I was very quiet and I was very reserved, and I was making sure to, really heads down, work it. And I have actually had the experience where being my outgoing, talkative, even like the way I dress, like I'm still dressing within the dress code, but I'm having fun with it, that sort of stuff, has made connections a lot easier. Like, I feel like we just had our annual reviews, and people are like, oh, she's always having fun while doing the best of work, and like that kind of stuff. So I think, heck yeah, show who you are. Of course, like, you're going to have your outside of work personality and your inside of work personality a little bit. But I would really encourage people to show it. And that's easier said than done, since I've been working at the same, spot since my internship. So I've known these people for a long time, but even with outside vendors and things like that, I think personality gets you really far. So don't be shy, be who you are, and definitely have a lot of fun while doing it. You're here for a lot of time in your life, so have fun.
Owen, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, definitely be authentic. I mean, it's easy to say. I mean, easy for me to say. I started the company, right? So like, I've been authentic from the beginning, and people are coming along, and I'd like to unlock that in others on the team, right? Like, to make sure that they bring that to work. I think that if you try to bottle it up, people feel that you're being reserved, and it just doesn't work as well. And so I certainly think should try to do it. I know all people have ranges of comfort on that. So the more that you can like take that step, hopefully you're also in an environment that's supportive of that too. And if you feel like you can't do that in that environment, that's probably another answer to the question of like when you should leave that organization.
Mm-hmm. Kristen, do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think looking at it also from a little bit of a different perspective, I think sometimes it can be difficult, especially as an intern, when you witness maybe some staff or seniors, people who have been in the firm for a few years now, that have really tight-knit relationships. I think it can be really easy to feel like almost like an outsider. And how do you form those friendships, especially match that energy? And I know, like Marissa said, I can be shy before I really get to know people. And I think, sometimes it can be difficult to break out of your shell. But I will say from my experience, the more you work with people, I think those relationships, they do develop over time, some slower, some faster. So I wouldn't worry about, I guess, how you're portrayed. Like Owen said, I think just being your authentic self, and eventually those relationships will develop the more that you work with people. And then also, I think from like a client service perspective, a lot of clients really appreciate when you can be personable with them. So that's also very important.
That's a great
So I will say, like, it has evolved even for me in the point where, like, now that we have a larger team, I do have to be more careful about like if there's sarcasm that I might use, then I'm like, this person's gonna think I'm just mean, right? Like, so I'm gonna like have to build that relationship first before I like would do something like that. Or even like music choices. Like, I like some rap sometimes, and I'm like, I don't know if like they'll like this. Like when I first, like if I have it on in the background. So I actually maybe have ratcheted it back a little bit as the team has grown before I build relationships with people, so they understand who you are.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is really reading the room, but always kind of, and you can incorporate it in small ways too. Like it can be in what you wear, always dress professionally, but you're able, think of yourself. You may not have to, again, depending on your work environment. I think you're able to show little pieces here and there. I also wanted to discuss a couple thoughts here. I know we've mentioned relationships a lot. So part of that book I mentioned earlier, they discuss a concept, I get it confused, whether it's loose ties or weak ties. And while you guys are all in your internships and you're meeting a lot of people, I wanted to just kind of discuss the concept of weak ties, again, or loose ties. I don't know which one it is. These are the folks, essentially, it's not like your cousin or your best friend or whoever. It's more of like your best friend's cousin or your friend's parents, coworker, etc. These are essentially the people that you know, and they're in your network. And those are the people that get you jobs. Those are the folks that you're able to, someone can make an introduction for you, bring you in on a conversation. And that's really when you think of expanding your network and having all these weak ties. Do either of you guys have any experience with building your network and how that's benefited you? And again, this isn't the best friend. This is more of the person that's removed from the person.
I mean, I feel like this is like my life. Like I spend so much time on LinkedIn, like figuring out, well,
Yeah.
who do I know that knows someone, right? That like can give me intro to in for a client or for an investor or when I was either looking for jobs after business school, when I created one, like at different companies. And I think it makes a lot of sense. The other thing to note is like, when you're a student, people love to talk to you, right? So like, it's like a magic card. And once you when you're no longer a student, people don't like to talk to you as much anymore. It kind of drops off. And so like use it now, like if you want to do like an informational interview, you want to learn about, I don't know, MedRhythms. I'm getting like 20 LinkedIn requests right now. I probably can't talk to all of you, but if you want to learn more about MedRhythms or like other companies, or like sit down, ask people for advice, meet them, like that will go a long ways. And like now is the time to do it, because once you're like employed, like it gets cut in half, people's willingness to help. That's not a mathematical fact, it's just an estimate.
Part of the conversation actually on that concept is that people like to do this stuff. These are favors that people like to do that aren't like helping you move. They're not something that's going to really put you out. And you're like, I do not want to do that. But the quick conversation of the coffee, I actually, I will tell you guys. So when I mentioned that podcast, I started briefly, best networking I could have ever done in my life, because I was 22 years old and I was sitting down with CEOs for an hour and hearing their whole life story. And that's how I got my job today, actually, at Live and Work in Maine. I will say I put this on my 5-year plan. They were a team of 2 at the time. There was no third person. There was no thought that I could ever get this job. It didn't exist. And I put that I wanted this job in 5 years or something similar. And Katie was one of my guests I had on the podcast. So I sat down with her when it was time for me to look for a job. This kind of unfolded. So it really pays off. And Marissa or Kristen, any thoughts on how maybe weak ties have benefited you guys? Or loose ties? Again, don't quote me.
So I think I have kind of a unique kind of approach to this, because I haven't done much movement outside of my organization. But I will say, and also a lot of people I work with stay here for a long time. So I've been here for like 4-ish years, which is a good sign, by the way, side note. And I have had people move up or laterally in other positions, which have really helped me in my position and what I'm doing. So a great example is I took a little time to work at a different one of the sites in the actual clinic. And now when I'm doing quality work for that clinic, it's like, we have little coffee chat catch up where I say like, how's the kids? How are you doing? And then immediately the work I'm asking about gets done. So I think that it can apply internally and externally too, because people's jobs might change, but then realizing like, oh, I can talk to this person because they have experience here and I need to get here. So that's a really good thing to keep in mind as well.
Certainly. And you think of in business as well. And when you're in your role, you may need these weak ties to help get you a meeting or what have you. Kristen, any experience?
I would say it's just really important to stay in touch with people that you meet. And I also think we'll probably touch upon this throughout the panel, but really like staying open to new opportunities. You never know who you might meet. I recently did a volunteering event and I met a lot of really amazing women that I reached out and I have their contact information and we've been chatting ever since. And we don't really work in the same industry, but you know, it's really all about connections. So I think it's important to stay in touch with the people that you do meet.
That is such a good point. And I think that's something that isn't really mentioned enough. That we talk about meeting people often, and great, you meet people one and done, but that's really not it. It's really to stay front of mind for them and create those lasting relationships. I still talk with people for my internships. I would consider them in my network. I could reach out to them. And that does bring me to another point of how we can utilize the internet to not only create some of these weak ties, but nurture these relationships and help you all develop, you know, your thoughts on where you might go post-grad. Because we are really in a unique time where we're able to do that and you're able to create these. I have relationships. So actually I've been speaking recently at schools that are nowhere in my realm. I didn't go there. And it's because someone listened to the podcast, asked me to go speak at their university. And they're also like with the Netherlands. So now I have connections in the Netherlands due to this podcast. So any thoughts on how we can utilize the internet to better form these relationships that will help us when we graduate? Owen, thoughts? I know you mentioned LinkedIn, and I know you definitely are utilizing those.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like a super user, right? Like on LinkedIn. So I mean, when I see something go by that's like an update or other things, I'll often like text them, right? And say like, hey, congrats, like, or even like small things. Or a quick email or send them a message, and just to stay top of mind. But it's even more, it's not like I want anything. It's like more natural. Like I actually do feel like it's exciting that X happened to them. And so, you know, they try to be authentic about that and then stay top of mind. And also, I mean, I do find that like going, like, even if you extend that to like, if you go to a conversation and you're meeting with someone, like I mean, it might seem a little creepy, but know something about them and come in with some context and ask like either next level questions or have some like background there. Like people like to feel like you care about them, and it's really easy if you're like, oh, like you grew up in X. You don't want to be creepy, but like, or write a note down on the profile and keep it for the future so you can remember what you talked about. Like some small things like that go a long ways.
Great point. Unless you guys have anything to comment on that, I wanted to discuss, I know we're getting short on time, but I wanted to discuss branding yourself. So what I mean by this is how to brand yourself, especially when you're looking at future jobs, not only online, but in person. And this might be, you have kind of positioned yourself as being a thought leader in something. It may be starting an Instagram or a TikTok or what have you. Any thoughts on how to brand yourself, again, either in person or online? Before it used to be just like a resume, and that was all we were able to give people. But now there's so much you could do, and you can really get opportunities through these. But Marissa, I know you were going to say something.
Yeah, no worries. So I actually think that I have some insight into this because for a long time I didn't, just because I was in this field. I've been in this field. I know my coworkers. So I was like, I don't need like a LinkedIn. I don't need to, you know, make myself known at kind of this or that event. But this past year, I really have been like, okay, I think I do. I think I really want to put myself out there, regardless of if it's for another opportunity or if it's for just getting to know people and having those, you know, loose ties or whatever we're deciding the word is. But I just recently got like a LinkedIn. I just got on there. So I would just say in terms of branding yourself, it's a little bit it was overwhelming for me because I wanted to do it in a professional way. I was worried about the photo. I was worried on how to use it and how to put myself out there. So I think there's no right or wrong time. And I've landed a couple jobs without having a LinkedIn. So I think that that's important to note as well. And then also I've been going to a lot more local events that aren't necessarily actually, Kristen actually touched on this a little bit. It's not necessarily my field or what I'm doing, but I went to some volunteering events and just talking with folks and just branding myself in the way of like, hey, I'm approachable. I have this fun colored outfit on, and then I'll make some jokes, and then maybe we'll see each other, maybe we won't. So it's kind of just, I think it goes back to an earlier conversation of just being your authentic self, and everybody has a different way of doing that. And I think that's also really awesome. And that's what makes working so fun, is you get to meet all these personalities. So definitely put whatever your strengths are forward. And, maybe if you're less outgoing, still push yourself to go to those events. You could get something out of it.
Great point. Any other thoughts on branding yourself?
I think maybe if you are a little bit more reserved and maybe a little less comfortable attending in-person events, there is a lot that you can do online to brand yourself, especially taking the route of LinkedIn. If you really like the firm that you're interning at and you follow them on LinkedIn, you can repost and share and like and comment. And you can even do that with other firms that you want to learn more about. Another thing that I think is pretty cool, when I was in school, we had a very generic course on professional development and what your traditional resume should look like. I think it's okay to color outside of the lines and have a really unique resume that really fits your personality. I know, in some schools may say that it's unprofessional, but in my experience, I've actually found that it helps you stand out more. So that's something to think about.
Owen, thoughts?
I don't have any revolutionary branding thoughts. I do know that it's like a give and take. You need to deliver on what your brand is too, right? So if Disney was a terrible place to go, the brand of Disney would be nothing, right? So back to the authentic, right? If you want to be committed to excellence, or if you want to be whatever it is, people need to have also say that about you, because that will relationships go in circles, and that will get found out over time and will fall apart. So I'm not a brand expert, but the substance also matters on the brand too.
Great point. And again, I know we're getting short on time, so I kind of wanted to give everybody, if they wanted, the floor as to any advice you would give your younger self, advice you'd give to folks listening, any last, words of wisdom. Marissa, do you want to, I can give you guys a few minutes to think about it if you want, but does anyone have anything ready?
No, I'm happy to jump in on that advice. I think, and it's kind of circling back to things we've already talked about before, is just stick with it. You're going to find the right path, and don't get frustrated because everybody's been there. But that's pretty much what I have. And then I really love the conversation surrounding authenticity as well. I do think it's really important, and I think people will notice that about you as well. So,
Kristen, any advice you'd give to maybe your younger self or anyone listening?
Yep, I definitely would just reiterate, stepping out of your comfort zone, can be very uncomfortable at first, but you always learn something from it. And like we touched upon, even if it's not something you like, you'll learn what you don't like, and then you can move on from there. And any experience that I've had that I maybe took a chance or took a risk, I've always benefited from in some way, even though it wasn't comfortable to take that initial leap. And then another thing I think that's really important is just always follow your gut and do what you think is going to benefit you and what feels right. And really try, it can be difficult at times, but not to compare yourself to your peers or your friends or your colleagues. I know, speaking from someone who went to a business school and works in the accounting field, there is often a very strong push to work at a Big Four company as opposed to a regional firm. And that might not be the best fit for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're behind or you're less successful just because you picked that path instead. So I would just make sure you're doing what really feels right for you in terms of where you want to work, where you want to live, and your professional career.
I love that. I think that's something I know I for sure struggled with. That's a big reason, again, I started that podcast, was I was seeing online all these people and all these cool girls living in New York City, living that cool girl life. And I thought the only way I will ever be happy is if I am an influencer living in these places. However, I loved Maine. I didn't want to leave Maine. My family was all here. My now husband was here. And it really didn't actually fit with me. And I remember, like, I don't know, 3 years into this, after I had decided, so I made the decision that I wanted to figure out what life looked like, how you could live like a cool, healthy, fun, successful life in Maine and living a similar life to me. And I remembered, like, 3 years after that, laying in bed one day, and like I had this pit in my stomach that I almost went that route and completely changed my life based on what I had seen online. And I knew that was not right for me. Like, I was very happy in my life, but I almost completely changed everything just to sort of fit in. And that was actually a really scary feeling because I was so happy with what I had. So I think being really, like we've mentioned a million times, authentic with yourself and just asking yourself those questions, like, what does make me happy? How do I want to spend my weekends? Is it in, New York City, or like, do I really enjoy getting to be outside? Do I love a Maine summer? What is I actually really like working for a smaller firm and knowing my clients or what have you. So I really like that point. Owen, and does anyone have anything to touch on that before we move on? The scary feeling of being influenced. Any thoughts? All right, Owen, what would you tell yourself?
No, I mean, I think definitely like learn from those who've been there before. The mentorship is really important. I think that's good. I think the thread you're going on right now is like, how do you want to measure your life? Which I think is really interesting. There's a podcast by or a YouTube video by Clay Christensen that talks about this, that it's really like work often is really gratifying because like you get instant rewards, like, oh, I did well at school, I did well, etc. But like a lot of the things in life are delayed gratification. Like if you choose to have kids and you're like raising them and like they're a giant pain for the first 2 years, they learn things, but whatever. Like, but like you're like, have someone that ideally is productive for society with a long-term relationship. Like oftentimes people regret not spending time with family. They don't regret like they regret not spending time with family. They don't regret that they left the office an hour early, right? Like so some of those things, like as you think about life, is important to put in perspective, maybe a little later down your journeys when you get there. I did want to, like, there's a couple of comments in the Q&A. I don't want to take your job, Ashley, about.
No, I'm sorry. I can't see any Q&A actually.
About grad school and like, when is the right time to do it? And and do you do it immediately? Do you do it later? And I'm happy to make a comment here. And I know Kirsten, sounds like you did it immediately, right? For your grad school.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I did not see Q&A. I was waiting in the chat box, but yes, please, Owen.
Yeah. So in my case, I actually at UMaine decided I was going to apply to business school, but at the time wanted to make sure that I had like it was the case study method I wanted to go into, and like wanted to make sure I had the perspective to add to the classroom and to take away from it, because a lot of the knowledge, at least in the MBA programs, and I don't want to insult them, but like you can find a lot of places, and probably ChatGPT will give you right now, right? Like, but like it's like the application of that and the ability to like synthesize that and figure out what you would do in their shoes, that was really important. And I felt like taking a few years off, then applying, and then contributing to the classroom where my classmates also took a few years off was really helpful. Now it's Kirsten, were you an MBA or like an MFA? What did you do for your like
MSA, Master's in Accounting?
Okay, but so like that's almost required sometimes, right, for accounting? Or
in my position, it's not, but it does depend which route you want to take. So once I decided that I wanted to pursue tax, I then decided that I would take the path of taking the CPA exams and eventually becoming a licensed CPA, which did require me to take a few more courses in order to acquire the adequate credits. So that's part of the reason why I decided to do grad school immediately after.
I think a lot of people will look for recommendations on this subject. And I know, I feel like everyone's gonna be like, girl, this answer is not what I was looking for, but I did. So I was originally going to go right after, and it's kind of what Owen was talking about with like my role that I was looking into kind of required that, right? So like that was the next logical step. Then I was like, oh, wait, I don't know if that's for me. Let me pursue something else, which touched back on what Ashley was talking about earlier, where it's like, instead of freezing, I just pursued a path, which has been awesome and rewarding. And then I took a couple of years off and really was like, okay, do I want to be a practitioner still? What kind of roles in healthcare excite me? I asked myself a lot of analytical questions after doing a role that I didn't see myself doing. And then I am pursuing my master's now, and I graduated in 2019. So I think that there's also something to be said that there's always time to go. A lot of people will have the notion of like, if you don't go now, you're never going to do it. I disagree. I kind of got to a point where I was like, I really miss learning. I'm going to go back just to learn about something I'm really passionate about, which is actually like integrative and holistic med. So I think that there's no recommendation per se. I think just checking in with yourself. And also I have friends who started their masters and decided they didn't want to anymore, and that's okay too. So
yeah, I mean, it probably comes down, it's the why, right? Like, why are you doing it? Is like, if you're doing it because you just want to keep doing school, that's probably a bad reason, right? Like if you're doing it because like you need it and it will help advance you like more rapidly, great. But as Marissa said, most people like go back, right? For master, like a lot of people go back for masters. Like you can get educated your whole life. There's no rush to do it now if you don't want to.
Hi, John. Are we
Is John giving us like the
are we getting the
I was hiding within the shadows, but this was such a great talk. Well, actually, I just wanted to kind of talk about the backwards plan that we kind of mentioned earlier in the panel, but we also talked earlier as well, like kind of mapping out what you need to, once you kind of figure out maybe a path, like maybe it's not the path for your whole life, but as you mentioned, but Owen, you kind of said North Star, or just working towards something, and then you backwards plan from that. So Kirsten, you're kind of saying like, once you kind of just realize, oh, I want to work towards this thing, then I'm going to backwards plan, which therefore means that I should probably go and pursue some sort of, post undergrad learning. So to kind of answer it, we had a lot of questions in the chat about like, how do I weigh, should I gain experience first, or should I go right to my graduate? Should I work at a company that will help me attain my master's? Like that's all kind of just a way to kind of answer those questions for you, is the backwards plan. I don't know if anyone wanted to kind of end on that. We'll probably end right at 1:30. So we still have a couple more minutes to kind of talk.
There was just one more question that kind of flew in that I would love to touch on. And that's just about seeking out grad school individually or working for a company that will support you. As someone who is being supported by my organization, I can say it has been super awesome in terms of team support, talking with my coworkers who are doing a similar thing, and also getting a little bit of extra help financially. It takes off a little bit of that stress. So personally, I'm really happy that I am working with my company on that. But again, it's one of those things where I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer.
And just to echo that briefly, I will say if anyone is curious, I would reach out to your academic services, maybe do a little research on your school website, but also definitely seek out a resource on campus to discuss the options that are available to you. Because when I was in undergrad, my second semester senior year, I actually had the option of taking 2 graduate classes at the undergraduate rate. And then I did graduate during COVID. And so there was an incentive for students to pursue grad school at a much cheaper rate. So if there's any options like that, I would definitely look into that. And that for me also made it a smart decision financially to pursue grad school immediately after undergrad.
So my perspective was a little opposite, where I wanted to do a bit of a career change and like open up some opportunity. And so had the opportunity to be funded by my employer, but was like, I don't want to go back there for 2 years. And so decided to go it alone. And so I think back to the why makes a lot of sense.
Great job. Well, everyone, I'm so sorry I didn't see your Q&A. I feel awful. I was waiting this whole time. I'm like, oh, so quiet. I made my screen smaller so I could read my questions and it chucked out the feature. So I'm so sorry. I hope you guys got your questions answered. But thank you guys so much. This was fantastic. And John, I think we're out of time, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and everyone who was in attendance. Thank you. This was a really informative panel. If you want to stay in touch with Maine Career Catalyst, you know where to find us on our newsletter and our Instagram. All of our panelists, your LinkedIn information is buried in the chat at this point, but you can find them on LinkedIn. Interns, thank you for coming here. You're doing all the right things. Hope to see you out at future events. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Best of luck.
Thank you.